And how about some chapter 1 review? So as I mentioned before, expressions like this, that comes from the definition of the derivative, so that's very important. And we're going to do the precalculus part, which means go to the function and first of all replace x with 3 plus h. So this is going to get replaced with a 3 plus h. So the whole thing is a fraction, so I'll make one big fraction bar and then substitute the 3 plus h in for this x. So it's going to have 2 on the top and then square root of 3 plus h plus 5. And then it goes minus. Now substitute a 3 into the function. So that's going to be 2 over the square root of 3 plus 5. And then it's divided by h. So now we get to simplify. Well, I know that 3 plus 5 equals 8, so I could go ahead and do that part. So each one of them inside the radical is going to have 3 plus 5. So that's going to be 8 plus h for the first one. And the radical for the other one is just going to be square root of 8. And then this whole thing is one big fraction, but it has fractions within fractions. That's called a compound or a complex fraction, so I need to simplify that. If you look at the two denominators and you multiply them together, that's the least common denominator. So a square root of 8 times a square root of 8 plus h is the common denominator. And then what I'll do is I'll multiply the top and the bottom by that least common denominator. So multiply it on each term. So this one gets multiplied with the square root of 8 times the square root of 8 plus h. Aquí también. And also on the bottom. And it looks like it's going to be a huge mess, but there's going to be lots of cancellation, which is the reason that I get a blue pen. Because I could have this 8 plus h in radical cancel this one. Here I could have the 8 plus 8, or excuse me, the square root of 8 and the square root of 8 cancel. So that means that on the top there is a 2 and a square root of 8 minus, and then a 2 and a square root of 8 plus h. And on the bottom there's going to be h and the square root of 8 and the square root of 8 plus h. And you might think that the square root of 8 plus h or the square root of 8 could cancel, but you cannot cancel unless something shows up in all places. So for example, this square root of 8 shows up once, twice, but it does not show up a third time. So it cannot cancel that. The same thing with the square root of 8 plus h. But what we can do to simplify some more is use the conjugate. So the conjugate means take this, hold on, let me get a pen. Means take this radical minus a radical and then multiply with the conjugate, which is going to be the same thing except with a plus in between. And I just need a little more space. So the conjugate is going to be 2 square root of 8 and then put a plus in between, and then 2 square root of 8 plus h. And if you multiply that on the top, you have to multiply that on the bottom. So 2 square root of 8 plus 2 square root of 8 plus h. And then we multiply out the top. And when you multiply the top, the first one times the first one, well, it's going to have a square root of 8 times a square root of 8, so that's just 8. It's also going to have a 2 times a 2, so that's going to be 4 times 8. And the good thing with the conjugate is the middle terms are going to cancel. So if I were to look at the middle terms, these two, it would be negative 4 times the 2 radicals. And when you multiply these two, it's going to be positive 4 times the 2 radicals. So those two are going to cancel. I don't actually have to do them. Then I need to use the last one times the last one. And then that's going to start with negative 2 times positive 2, so that's negative 4. And then when you multiply the 2 radicals, they will cancel, leaving you just with 8 plus h. And with the bottom, you can just copy it down. You don't have to multiply it out. You don't have to do anything to it. You can leave it like that. And then if you look on the top, this is going to be a negative 32, and this is a positive 32, so those two cancel. On the top, all that's left is a negative times an h. So there's a negative h on the top, and then h and square root of 8 and square root of 8 plus h. So I'm just recopying the bottom and talking to myself as I do it. All right, now we get to the important point. The important point is, if we were doing calculus, the only difference is we would say let h become a 0. And then you'd say, oh, you can't divide by 0. That's impossible. But it turns out we have an h on the top and h on the bottom, so they can cancel, leaving just a negative 1 on the top. And then if you just recopy the rest, then at that point we're done with the precalculus part. And then the calculus part would be let h become a 0. And when you let the h become a 0, this would be 8 plus 0, so that is not dividing by 0. And also the same thing would happen right here. So because we, in blue up here, canceled these h's, that means there's no more division by 0 when we let h become 0. So that is as far as we take it in precalculus.